Neil Armstrong had a strange encounter while on the moon and kept it hidden from everyone else for over 50 years. The Apollo 11 commander is among NASA legends when it comes to space travel due to the feat he accomplished by becoming the first man to set foot on the lunar surface on July 20, 1969. We are all aware of this historic experience. However, there is one event in particular that was hidden from the public. While on the moon, Armstrong ran into something that almost prevented the Apollo 11 mission from returning home. He kept it a secret until his death. What did the first man on the moon hide from us? The first landing on the moon has slowly become the realm of American mythology. This achievement was so amazing that the decade of space travel was concentrated in a single event. It almost seems that on a summer day in 1969, 3 men boarded a rocket, traveled to the moon, donned their spacesuits, walked around, and planted the American flag before returning home. However, that was not all that happened. Neil Armstrong found something that he kept secret, but it was eventually revealed when he died. Before Neil Armstrong could take his one small step for man on July 20, 1969, he and the rest of the Apollo 11 crew went through a rigorous training process to prepare for their lunar mission. Although much of their training took place in test facilities and in the classroom, NASA also assigned astronauts tasks such as collecting geological samples. They also trained to get in and out of the lunar lander to help build muscle memory and replicate these procedures on the moon. To make the team's training as realistic as possible, the crew trained at selected sites here on Earth that eerily resembled the lunar topography. NASA was searching for locations similar to the moon, and astronauts trained at various locations in the United States and abroad to learn the geologic features they would encounter on their mission. The field training was highlighted because NASA wanted astronauts to learn muscle memory steps to collect samples and take pictures without wasting time. They practiced collecting and analyzing soil and rock samples at multiple sites, as well as digging trenches and collecting samples at different levels. Selecting locations and collecting samples, they practiced describing geological features verbally and in writing, documenting sites with photographs, and labeling samples. NASA made analog missions a regular training tool for astronauts. During the Apollo 11 landing, Neil and Armstrong faced a problem when the computer indicated an error code 1202 and they did not know its source. Controllers in Houston searched for the problem as stress grew on the lunar module. Communication was failing, the computer was having problems, and the flight director was concerned about the lack of power to the control center. The problems began after the separation of the command module, with radio link problems. The flight director admitted to making decisions about how much information was enough. The order to begin powered descent and rocket brake landing was given, but communication was lost. Armstrong tried to fix the problem, but the radio connection kept failing. If the situation worsened, the mission would have to be aborted. Meanwhile, various alarms were activated in the lunar module cockpit, including the overload alarm, which indicated an overload if the landing computer was reset. Due to this alarm, they would have to abort the mission instantly. Flight controllers on Earth were dealing with communication problems and intermittent radar data during the lunar landing. The computer received too much data, which caused an unknown alarm in the lunar module. Flight controllers on Earth made the decision to proceed with the landing as long as the alarm did not repeat itself constantly. Despite another similar alarm, the astronauts went ahead with the landing, concentrating on the instruments, Armstrong manually controlling the landing. However, a new problem arose: its location was not as planned. Armstrong suggested thinking about jet descent, but then lost communication. He tried to fix it without success. If it got worse, they would have to abort. The master alarm sounded and the landing computer indicated an oxygen overload during the landing. Neil Armstrong asked Houston for clarification about the alarm that was going off in the cockpit. Mission controller Steve Bales decided it was safe to proceed as long as the alarm was erratic. They decided to proceed with the landing, since it was almost as dangerous to try to abort with a faulty computer as it was to continue. His fellow astronaut, Charlie Duke, beamed the message into space saying, "We are continuing that alarm." Despite another alarm from the computer, they decided to continue through the landing. They were focused on the instrument displays and Armstrong was in manual control of the landing. However, another problem was slowly beginning to appear. They were not where they were supposed to be. Armstrong remembered that in the commander's window there was a grid calibrated at his height, which allowed him to check his position on the moon. However, the irregular gravity of the moon and the extra speed they gained when they disengaged from the command module caused them to overshoot their intended landing zone. Armstrong had a bad view of a vast field of craters and boulders the size of trucks, rather than the smooth, flat area shown on the orbital map. Manually piloting, he searched for a soft place to land. During the lunar landing, Armstrong and his crew were nervous due to the strange trajectory and low fuel level, which meant they had to abort in 60 seconds. Armstrong searched for a soft spot while he calculated speed and range. After landing, the crew went through their checklist, but a buildup of pressure was observed on the consoles. The situation was reported and they considered aborting the mission, but the heat from the engine melted the ice and the problem was resolved. After 3 hours on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin attempted to open the lunar module's hatch after completing their checklist. However, they found that they could not get all the air out of the LEM and that there was still too much pressure. After several tries, Aldrin had to peel the edge of the hatch to get it open without breaking it. As Armstrong exited the module, something broke, which turned out to be the ascent motor arming switch, presenting another dangerous problem for the mission. Buzz Aldrin noticed something unusual on the floor of the lunar module as he prepared to go out on the lunar surface. He discovered it was a broken circuit breaker that had come loose from the ascent motor's arming vital switch. He realized that he and Armstrong must have accidentally hit the switch with their large backpacks while trying to get out of the lunar module door. The circuit breaker was broken and needed to be pushed back so the ascent motor could fire up and take them home. Houston was unable to find a solution, so they inserted a pen into the opening of the broken circuit breaker to push it in and hold it in place, thus ensuring the operation of the ascent motor. If the motor arming circuit breaker had not closed, Armstrong and his crew would have been trapped on the moon. In the event the pen hadn't worked to fix the broken circuit breaker, mission control and the crew would have looked for other ways to close the circuit and start the ascent motor. After valves fixed the broken circuit breaker with a felt-tip pen, it was decided to keep a guard on those breakers on later lunar modules. Impromptu as the arrangement was, the ascent motor fired successfully and the astronauts were able to return to Earth. Aldrin still keeps the broken switch and the pen he used, while Armstrong kept a bag full of small pieces of the Eagle lunar module. After Armstrong's death in 2012, his widow turned the storage bag over to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. The curator of space artifacts found Neil Armstrong's bag exciting as it contained valuables from the lunar mission, such as the lanyard, equipment mounts, lights and an emergency wrench. It also included the optical sight and camera that recorded iconic images of the lunar landing. Armstrong kept the bag secret for more than 40 years, and although the bag and its contents were moved to the command module before the lunar lander crashed on the lunar surface to prevent its destruction, it is not known how Armstrong obtained the bag after the mission. Whether Armstrong concealed the space mission artifacts, including from his wife, is unknown and raises questions about his motives. As for the mention that Armstrong and his crew on the moon broke some rules by bouncing off a part of the moon to take pictures of some interesting rocks, That is unsubstantiated speculation. There is no evidence that the photos turned out to be of extraterrestrial origin.